Hello, I'm Andrew Lazur. I'm a water quality specialist with the University of Maryland Extension, and welcome to this Wednesday water webinar discussing simple tips to care for your water well. For this discussion, I'm going to briefly touch on aquifers, what they are, talk about well design, different types, and then also the importance of testing your water quality, and then some general practices that you can implement to protect your well. In Maryland, we have the coastal plain aquifer, which again is mostly sand and gravel, and numerous aquifers. You can see here that as we get closer to the coast, that geology kind of slants off, and you can see there's probably 5 or 6 different aquifers in there. We even have some saltwater intrusion. Contrast, in the Piedmont region, we have a fractured rock geology, and so the water is actually stored in these fractures. And so some of these wells could be tapping into a fracture that is directly connected to the shallow water table, and it's the shallow water table that has a greater risk of surface contaminants, whether that be road salts, any sort of chemicals, agricultural fertilizers, things like that. So the wells, the actual design of the wells will vary dependent upon the type of geology that you're located in. This is the coastal plain well, which has the casing going all the way down into the confined aquifer here, and then has a screen, and that screen is designed to prevent reduce the intake of sand particles, for example. In contrast, a fractured rock well has an open borehole. So the casing may only go down, 30, 40, 50 feet, really just depends, until it reaches these fractures, and then the water from the fractures will enter this open borehole, and that serves as part of the reservoir, and then the pump will pump it up. So this is a schematic of the anatomy of a well. And again, dependent upon the geology, you may have a open borehole, but here this one is showing a submersible motor inside the casing with a well screen. The water's being pumped up, and then it's going into this pitless adapter, which is below the frost line, basically going into the house. And then through a series of pressure switches and everything is inflating this bladder tank or pressure tank. And so when a faucet is opened up in the home, then the water will leave the tank under pressure and then go into the faucet. Some of the things that are really important as a homeowner can do is to inspect their wellhead. So this is where the casing is sticking above the ground. Typically, it's 1 foot to 2 foot above the ground. And what we're looking for is that you have a sanitary well cap. More on that in just a minute. You also have the land is sloping away from the wellhead in all directions because you don't want standing water in there. And then you have a good grout seal. And grout is basically a specialized clay, like a bentonite clay, that's packed in around the perimeter of the casing. And what that does is it helps to seal any sort of surface water that might try to follow the outside perimeter of the casing down into the well, potentially contaminating the well. So again, make sure your well cap is in good order, make sure the ground slopes away from your wellhead, and grout seal is in good shape. Here's a plastic well cap that can be bought at most plumbing supply places. It has a rubber seal that goes around the well casing to seal it. This is access for the electrical conduit for the submersible pump, and it has these screened vents, and that'll prevent insects from getting into the well and actually, adding bacterial contamination. And inexpensive, and does a lot in protecting your well from any sort of surface contamination or insects, things like that. Other thing important about wells is that they should follow certain setbacks away from your septic system, away from your neighbor's septic system, away from buildings and roads, things like that. Again, your local county health department or your state Department of Environment has all this information as far as what the proper setbacks. So some general tips. One of the first things that you can do is actually get a copy of what's called the well log. If you don't have any information on your well, it's possible that your local county health department may have records, because again, they issue permits typically for wells and septic systems, and they may have a record of that well. And that information is real important because it tells you lots of things, such as when was the well dug, how deep it is, who installed it. They even have some water quality information available at that time, what type of motor it is. So that's a really important piece of information. And then also keeping records of any repairs that you have, any water tests that you have. Keep that in a separate place for your well information. And then another really important thing is to test your well water. Well water, private well water, is not regulated by any government agency, as is public water. So therefore, it's up to the well owners to test their water. And this is what we recommend to test annually for coliform bacteria, E. coli, and nitrates. These are basically indicators of some contamination from animal waste, whether it be wildlife, pets, livestock, or sewage. The other thing is, if you haven't tested in a while, is to test these other parameters: chloride, pH, lead, copper, total dissolved solids, sulfates. And then it's important to note that certain geology will contain naturally occurring deposits of such things as arsenic or radium. And again, your local health department will have information on that. You can also test your well if you're experiencing certain problems that you notice, whether it's cloudy water or the orange or black stains that would indicate iron and manganese, or hardness, for example. If you get a lot of spots on your glasses, your fixtures, that might be an indication that you have high hardness. The other times to test, of course, is if you have infants or pregnant women in the home. Again, they tend to be more susceptible to water contaminants, so it's a wise thing to test your water. If any guests have intestinal illnesses, that could be an indication that there's some bacterial contamination. And if your neighbors find something, that may be an indication that your well is at risk. If you notice any sort of sudden change, that's a great time to also test your water. And then if your well has been repaired or parts have been replaced, it needs to be tested for the coliform and E. coli, because again, anytime a well is opened, there runs a risk of it being contaminated. Other times would be keep your pets away from your wellhead. Mowing, for example, you don't want to damage the wellhead by running into it with a lawnmower, for example. You can pick up after your pets, and certainly pump and maintain your septic system. That's very important. And the general rule of thumb is to pump your tank every 3 to 5 years. But that will vary depending upon the size of your tank and the number of occupants. The more the people, the more frequent that you would have to pump. Other tips include you can use lower toxicity cleaners. EPA has a great resource online about that. Try to minimize your fertilizer and pesticide use. That will reduce the amount of runoff that could be approaching near your wellhead or reaching groundwater. Also, again, proper storage of your typical lawn care chemicals, and then do not dump anything on the ground. That's very important because, again, anything that we do on the ground potentially can contaminate the groundwater. Not everything is absorbed by the soil or broken down by the soil. So it's important to not dump, use recycling plants wherever. And if you have any underground storage tanks for fuel, make sure that those are inspected and not leaking, because again, that can contaminate groundwater. And another really important tip well owners can take to reduce groundwater contamination is have any abandoned wells, unused wells, properly sealed. This is real important because wells are basically a direct conduit to the groundwater. So whatever's going on the surface, it's just running off into an abandoned well and going straight down into the groundwater and contaminating it. And it's also important to note that it needs to be properly sealed by a licensed contractor, because it's not a question of just filling it up with rock or sand or even concrete. Have special techniques that have to be done. You fill it up with regular concrete, that concrete will crack and eventually still serve as a conduit. So it has to be done professionally. So those are some basic tips to protect your well and therefore to protect your water quality. And I encourage you to take advantage of the various resources that are out there. Also remember, your local county health department is a wealth of information, may have information on your well, and can also make recommendations on what to test for, and can give some idea of local laboratories that can conduct those analyses. So thank you.